and welcome to DATAVERSITY Talks, a podcast where we discuss with industry leaders and experts how they have built their careers around data. I'm your host, Shannon Kemp, and today we're talking to the co-founders of Moxy Analytics, Laura Madsen, CEO, and Serena Roberts, COO.
Visit DATAVERSITY.net and expand your knowledge with thousands of articles and blogs written by industry experts, plus free live and on-demand webinars covering the complete data management spectrum. While you're there, subscribe to the weekly newsletter so you'll never miss a beat.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp and I'm the Chief Digital Officer at DataVersity, and this is My Career in Data, a DataVersity Talks podcast dedicated to learning from those who have careers in data management, to understand how they got there, and to be talking with people who can help make those careers a little bit easier. To help keep up to date in the latest data management education, go to dataversity.net/subscribe. And today we are joined by two fabulous people in data, the co-founders of Moxy Analytics, Laura Madsen as CEO and Serena Roberts, COO, or as appropriately renamed, the Chief Get Shit Done Officer, which I love. We'll get to that in a minute here. And normally this is where a podcast host would read a short bio of the guest, but in this podcast, your bio is what we're here to talk about. Laura and Serena, hello and welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us, Shannon. We're excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you two are here. And I asked you to be here together as the co-founders of Moxy Analytics. So tell me more about Moxy Analytics. What is the company and how did it come to be?
Sure. Yeah. Well, Serena and I probably should have practiced who said what, but I'll kick off because I think we both sort of agree, at least in the origin story at the beginning level, which is I quit my corporate gig at the end of 2018, having no real plan, which, tips for better living, don't do that. I'd been in data for a really long time at that point, had a really large network, figured I'd find a project here and there, sort of started in earnest doing some data project work, and then realized, wait a second, I could probably actually do this for a living. And then started thinking about doing it on my own, which didn't sound as much fun. And really the only person that I knew in my network that felt like the right fit for me was Serena. And so I started pinging her, asking nicely if she would quit her corporate, cushy corporate gig and join me in this ridiculous adventure. So what would you add, Serena?
Well, that's a pretty good overview of our origin story, but I think to just touch on what Moxy Analytics is for people that might not know, we are a data and analytics consulting firm. We do a little bit of everything. We find ourselves doing a lot of data literacy, data governance, to Laura's chagrin. I don't know why she wrote a book on a subject that she hates. Now she's going to spend the rest of her life trying not to do data governance work, which is the thing that she's best known for. But really, it's about everything that we do falls under this umbrella of enabling a data culture, right? Why do people build dashboards? Why do people govern their data? Why do they have self-service, efforts? Why do they do data science? And why do they do all these things, right? They do this because they want their cultures to be focused around data and how they can use that to make better decisions and drive better business outcomes. So yeah, we're a consulting firm. We do stuff for money.
I love it. So it's very fascinating start there. So what is it you do specifically? What is the most common thing you do for your clients, and how do you work with data in your current jobs?
I'll take it on first, Laura, and you can round it out. So we do things like build dashboards for people, or do proofs of concepts if they're thinking about some kind of data visualization tool, or even like a data catalog or things of that nature. We have done a number of projects recently that are more around like kickstarting data governance initiatives and data literacy initiatives. And when I say data literacy, I mean applied data literacy. And the difference between applied data literacy and just like regular data literacy is that there truly is an immediate application for what you learn. So the learning objectives for these data literacy programs are how to use that company's tools, to use that company's, to access that company's data to solve that company's problem. And then oftentimes when we hear from organizations who are interested in data literacy, data governance, it just like comes right along in tow, right? Because you don't want to have a bunch of people using your data without any kind of like guidelines or, you know, safety rules in place. So those two projects oftentimes like they overlap and there's a lot of interchangeability. So, and it's also the space that Laura and I get to work together on projects in. Otherwise, we're usually kind of off doing our own things. So I don't know, what did I forget, Laura?
I tend to focus a lot on data strategy. I call myself a fractional CDO or chief data officer. So I support a lot of chief data officers, either because they just started at their job and they need a little support as they get going, or there's specific functions that they need support on, like data governance. So I do a lot of data strategy, a lot of support of chief data officers, and of course, as we all probably know at this point, fair amount of data governance work, despite my love-hate relationship with it. So
we'll come back to that in a little bit. So tell me, so when you were very young in elementary school, you know, is this what you dreamed of being when you grew up? I'm going to start a company and help people with their data problems.
Okay, so I'll start. So I will tell you, and my dad would probably tell you, that by the time I was 9 years old, started like 3 companies. I had a babysitting company. I had a sandblasting company where I would sandblast designs on things for people. And then over the years, right, just had a million ideas for businesses. So the business side for me was always the thing. Some of it may have been my overwhelming need to get out of my small town, because I was a runner. I wasn't going to stay. So it was really, for me, always about business. Was it always about data? It was not, although a college professor will tell you that is clearly how I thought, like everything. And even now, I pretty much make every decision in the context of some kind of matrix. So it was always kind of there as a latent thing, but from a business perspective, sure, I always wanted to be a business owner and be the boss, so to speak. So
I like it. Serena, what about you?
I'd have to say there's probably a lot of parallels between Laura and I on that front, where but I will say I literally did not know that that business intelligence, that like data and analytics was a thing until I was legitimately 24-ish, 25 years old, right? So, did I want to work with data when I was a kid? Oh my God, no. No. That would be, I think, abnormal. I wanted to figure out ways to just not work at all, which isn't not what I'm doing right now. But yes, I have always had that entrepreneurial spirit. I have always had that sort of take charge, leadership. Just ask my my siblings, who are both younger and older than me, but wherever you fell in that spectrum, I was the boss, unfortunately for them. My formal education is actually in entrepreneurship. So my degree is in entrepreneurship. So I knew that was a thing, that, it was a passion. It was kind of where my life was going to lead me at some point. And it, I think for a lot of people who are in, certain levels of privileged positions, you do get to a point where you're just sick of all of the bullshit. And then you're like, I'm like, screw that. I'm just going to go try my own thing. I'm going to just see what happens here. And, back to our origin story, it literally had a conversation with my husband. So this was the gig that I was in before I left my corporate gig. And my husband said to me, he's like, I knew you were kind of a B word. I won't say that, but he's like, I knew you were kind of a B word when I married you, but this is some next level stuff. Like, you need to quit your job, woman. Like, you're just unbearable. And it was the truth. Like, I was not being good to anyone, myself included. And as like, part of that conversation, it was just like, well, I can't quit my job. Like, we have health insurance through me. Like, I make more money than you do. Like, how are we going to live? How is this going to work? And we just were like, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Well, we could have to sell everything that we own and live in an RV. And then there was this moment where we were both kind of like, that actually doesn't sound that bad. So it might actually still do that, even if this thing works out. So anyway, all that to say, I did not know that this is exactly where I would end up, but I feel like, gosh darn it, it's the right place to be.
Oh, I love it. I can relate to what a lot of what both of you are saying, very much so. But tell me, so how did you get from this entrepreneurial passion into data? So what led you to a path of data management?
You can go first, Laura.
Well, mine's actually a really straight path, to be honest with you. And when I talk with other people that are in data, for a really long time, we had no programs that did anything to do with data, right? And so for most part, the people that I worked with, people that I worked for over the years, had no background in data. And so I was a little bit different. So I went to school initially for fashion merchandising, which, if you knew me at all, would make you wonder what I was thinking, because I can barely match my own outfits, which is why I wear black a lot. So, there was just a different time in my life where I thought, ooh, fun. And that didn't last real long. And so I had to pick a major, and the major I picked was strictly because I was going into a new college and they needed a major on record because I was a junior, and I just picked the hardest final I ever had, which was psychology. And so I was like, oh, well, I can switch at any time, right? And I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in psychology. And the unfortunate thing about a bachelor's degree in psychology is it's 100% useless. And I am, and particularly when I was in my 20s, I'm not a very empathetic person. I had zero ability to be a therapist. As a matter of fact, I practically flunked that therapy class because everybody that takes psychology as a program has to take that class. And yeah, they pulled me aside and said, boy, please don't do this. You'd set the industry back many, many decades if you became a therapist. So I didn't know what to do with a psychology degree. I had a really brief stint in the Army because I thought, well, they'll take me.
Wow.
They didn't.
Yeah, they didn't. They took me long enough to realize, nope, we don't want her. And I ended up in what's called applied psychology, which is actually an applied analytics degree that from a social sciences perspective uses applied data and statistical methods to control for error. And the easiest way to think about that is like surveys, right? So I spent 2 years learning about statistical methods that control for error. And my first job was at a psychiatric hospital. And my family's still convinced that I didn't work there. I was actually an inmate. Inpatient. Wonderful services, by the way, and very important particularly for our healthcare programs in the United States. But I ended up working at a psychiatric hospital and really helped them bring along their data program. And the crazy thing about it, which I did not know I was doing at the time, I was creating a data warehouse. So we had a method of inputting all of the intake assessments that all of our patients took. And I was responsible for putting all that data into tables and analyzing all that data. And so that was my first professional job, and I've been doing it ever since. And that was 1999.
Wow. Wow, I love it. So, and Serena, what about you? What brought you to data?
Well, first I have to say, Laura, I know you glossed over a couple other careers journeys in there, but we'll save that for another podcast. Mine was definitely like, I just kind of fell into this world without even trying. So I had my first child when I was 19, and I also have a sister who is younger than I am, and when I moved out, she moved with me. So I had my young son, and my sister, who I was mostly responsible for. And I grew up in a small town also, and I was also a runner. I was like, I need to get out of here. It was North Branch, Minnesota. Like, it's not like crazy far, but it was like 1,100 people when I graduated from there. So I got out of there as soon as I could. I moved from North Branch to Lakeville, Minnesota, because that felt like a huge distance to me back then, right? And I literally was just like, I need a job. I need a JOB. I need to support these people. And I wound up finding a role in like sales and marketing, just kind of doing whatever needed to be done for a BI consulting firm that was still, relatively in their startup phase. I think I was employee number 18 or something like that. And it literally wasn't until that day that I knew that this field even existed, that you could make, good money doing this kind of work. So I started out in sales and marketing in that role. And also, just like I said, like when you are employee number 18, you do like whatever needs to be done. So then it was like, okay, well, now I'm writing statements of work, and now I'm trying to, help figure out who are the right people to be on these projects. And like, I'm learning more about, what it takes to deliver this kind of work. And so I just kind of like was able to slide into the delivery side of, data and analytics work. And I started teaching how to use some of these programs. And it was just fascinating. And as the tools got easier to use, and I became more technically proficient and all of those things. And, people always say that, if you can learn the technical stuff, it's so much harder to learn how to deal with people and like, maintain relationships and those. So I've always been able to check that second box, right? Like that has come pretty easy to me, doing the sales and doing the marketing and, that relationship sort of selling and that kind of thing. And I was able to just learn all the technical stuff. And so I came out of that 10-year stint at that one consulting firm with both of those skill sets, and bonus, a relationship with Laura Madsen, because that's how we met each other. That's how we first got in contact. So definitely not a linear path into this field, but come to find out that's really probably more the norm, more the rule than the exceptions, that people just kind of found their way here. And it's so much a part of our world, data, so much a part of everything that we do. I think it's going to be hard to escape it at some point. Everyone will work with data in some capacity.
I don't disagree with that. And yeah, I certainly don't disagree that there are very few linear paths that I've seen or encountered, which is part of why we're doing this podcast, right? Is just to figure out what those paths are, what were some best practices and along the way. But so So there's a few things that I would want to dive into, but let me get into what is your current definition of data and how do you work with it in the roles that you're currently doing?
Yeah, I saw that question and I was like, what kind of question is that? But, honestly, I feel like data is like everything and nothing at the same time, right? I mean, almost everything that we do creates data. We are processing data all the time in our brain, as our human brains are doing. But so it's everything in a certain sense, but it's also nothing if you can't turn it into information, right? If you don't have the ability to, whether through your brain, like this car is coming at me, which means I should get out of the way, or you're aggregating millions of rows of data to try to tell you what your next quarter is going to look like. So that in that sense, it's also nothing, right? That if you're not able to translate that into information. And obviously what we do with it today is help more people be able to take the data around them and turn it into useful information and be able to use it in safe and meaningful and timely manners.
Laura, anything to add to that?
It's really good. I mean, I agree that data is everything and nothing, right? I have a strong affinity for data, and found my home really early on, right? Once I realized that this is how I thought. So the idea of like always bringing in data and consuming it in a myriad of ways is just how I kind of operate as an individual. And probably one of my biggest, like the thing that I love to do with clients is to help, take that chaos and turning it into something that feels like it's, just a little chaotic, right? I mean, I love the mess, so that's part of the quirky personality, but I love the mess and I love the data, and I live in that chaos, but I recognize that most people don't. They don't want to live there. They don't really like it. They prefer to visit, So to me, it's like, yeah, particularly in a modern age, I've been at this for 20 some years now. So when I started, your data came in an inner office envelope. Right? And now we're all producing, millions of rows of data every day just existing. And so, that ride has been really fun and cool, and I've enjoyed it. But for me, it really is realizing that because I'm so keen on that part, I can help the people that aren't, and then kind of figuring out how to take advantage of all of that and just live just slightly outside of that chaos, so that you really can build towards insights, and at some point maybe even get some foresight.
So with your definition of data, it sounds like even though so Laura, you took a more linear path, Serena maybe not so linear to working with data. I think the commonality there, and what I'm finding with almost everybody, is that it was your passion. You just followed your passion, really, is what you did. Passion for wanting to build and start a business and be involved in that, at the heart of it. But it sounds like you develop passions in different areas, and how do you complement each other in working? Because and I'm fascinated too, Laura, that you don't you have a love-hate relationship with governance. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. So how do you divide up the work, and where is that specific passion? Because management is such a broad topic, right? There's so many different areas. So what are your passions, and how do you split that up and maximize those passions?
Sure. Yeah. So I think we actually have a pretty nice, we operate in very distinct capabilities, and then there's a few spots where we overlap, as Serena had said earlier. Because I've existed in data for a really long time, right? That strategy and the governance and the management. I've led a lot of data warehouse teams. So that is definitely where I live and breathe in those sort of, more data management functions and then the data leadership areas. And that's just because that's where I've always been, right? And I think Serena, just doesn't exist in those spaces except where we, overlap. So that's really the nice, I'm not being very articulate about this, but yeah, I don't know, Serena, why don't you take a stab at
Sure.
answering that question? I actually I have an answer, but it's not coming out right. So we're just gonna skip this and move forward.
No, that's all good. Well, Shannon, I think there was like 3 questions in your question.
Sure, yes.
So first of all, passion came later, and I followed the money straight up. I needed the money. I needed a job that was going to, support me and my dependents. And when I think about the passion that actually led me here with Laura right now, that was more passion for wanting to be the best version of the sum of all of my parts, right? I no longer wanted to accept the fact that I had to compartmentalize Serena as, the data and analytics professional, Serena as the wife, Serena as the mother, Serena as the sister, as the whatever, right? Because we all operate, especially, women, let's be honest, right? As far as domestic responsibilities go, we generally take the lion's share of that. And we are more social creatures. We're more responsible for the relationships that our family as a collective has with other families. And so I just felt like I was done compartmentalizing those things and always feeling like if I wanted to succeed at one, that I had to suck a little bit more at the others. And so my passion was that led me really where we are right now was trying to buck that norm, trying to challenge that status quo, not just for myself, but for other women who I know felt the same and were in similar situations. So I just wanted to call that out on what passions actually led me here, right? There's never really been a passion for, the work is fun and it's cool and it's interesting, but if I'm being honest, those aren't the things that fill my cup every single day, right? So now, if I can address the synergies between Laura and myself, synergy is the best word to describe it. We are the physical representation of the yin and the yang. I feel like I should actually be wearing a white shirt right now, just to prove that point, because Laura is always wearing black, and I am sometimes, but usually not wearing black. She loves to not be around people, and I usually enjoy that. And so there are just from the perspective of who we are as people, we are very different, but we share some really fundamental core values, and that is our foundation, and that is our mission, and that's our our true north, or whatever people are calling that these days, where we can always come back in service and in alignment on those things. And as far as the work goes, I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, where you can't have a data literacy program without data governance. You just can't, or please don't. I beg of you, please don't. And if you are putting all of that effort into your data governance and data management efforts, then why aren't you you should probably have more people using that. That's kind of a waste. So again, it's such a synergistic thing. While Laura's never going to be involved on building a Tableau dashboard or something along those lines, and I'm not going to be writing books about data governance or advising chief data officers on what their data strategies are going to be, do operate in very different spaces in a lot of respects. But synergy is really just the best way to describe how we work together and how we just gel together as human beings.
Love it. Laura, anything you want to add now that you've had a moment to process that?
Right. It's just funny to me because it's so rare that, I talk about myself, right? I'm always talking about the topics. I'm always talking about data and what you should or should not be doing, or, that kind of a thing. That it's really rare that I talk about, how I got here, how I think about things, what Serena and I do on a day-to-day. So it's funny that I tend to not, this is where I get stuck. It's like tripping over the stuff that I probably know the best, but just don't have the practice of talking about, how we got here. I will say that, what an incredible privilege in so many ways, right? So I'm really fortunate that just in general, I'm very fortunate. And so privilege is always in the back of my head. Like I've had an opportunity, because I live in a privileged space, to be able to start a company, and my husband carries the insurance and all those other things, right? But I also feel an enormous amount of privilege in finding Serena as the yin to my yang, or the yang to my yang, right? Because the reality is, if it weren't for her sort of holding me down, as they say, I would, just never be able to be very successful. And the reality is, I would have ruled the world by now if it wasn't for my crippling anxiety. So, I need that person that can help me through some of that. And she is that person. So, I'm just really fortunate to be able to live in that space. And then I think you asked about data governance and how in the world I ended up hating data governance, but doing data governance. So, that is a funny story. But so I started when I left my corporate gig in 2018. I did sort of a, data, like an assessment of the data landscape. But at that point, I had been in corporate gigs for a while. And I'd led these functions, and I hadn't really what is everybody talking about? And through that process, identified that data governance really had not been conceptually updated since the late 90s, and had been identified as the reason why everybody was tripping all over themselves. Oh gosh, it's data governance, data governance, blah, blah, blah. And I used to joke, if it's not true anymore, but that when I Googled it at that point, the definition of data governance was 2 paragraphs long. It was almost a page long. And it's and I knew in that moment, it was one of those Disney moments, right? Where it's everything sort of coalesced and the sky opened up, and it was oh crap, I got to write a book about data governance, because we suck at this, friends. I mean, we're just doing this all wrong. And in the very first sentence I write in that book is I really hate data governance. And I hate it because we just keep getting in our own way. I'm very passionate about data and what it can do for organizations, but my gosh, we just all the things that we do to get in our own way from preventing ourselves from using the data and finding the insights and the foresights for the data is that list is super, super long. But for whatever reason, that day I picked data governance. And here we are.
Here we are.
More and more companies are considering investing in data literacy education, but still have questions about its value, purpose, and how to get the ball rolling. Introducing the newest monthly webinar series from DATAVERSITY, Elevating Enterprise Data Literacy, where we discuss the landscape of data literacy and answer your burning questions. Learn more about this new series and register for free at dataversity.net.
I love it. Well, I kudos to both of you for finding that synergy. For my own philosophy of business, so many leaders build teams that look exactly like themselves, and how do you, and I think some of the biggest challenges is finding and accepting people who do balance out our weaknesses. There's so many leadership books and such that say that we should play to our strengths, and good leaders always are always conscious of what they're good at. And I would argue with that. I would argue that really good leaders, yes, know their strengths, but that's easy to know. Our egos just as human beings allow us to know what we're good at. But it's finding those weaknesses and filling those. I think that's the biggest strength that good leaders have, and kudos to you for finding that and being open about that. And I really love that synergy that you guys have and have built on. So so with that, in your careers, and do you see the importance of data management and the number of jobs working with data increasing or decreasing over the next 10 years, and why?
I think it's going to increase, right? I just think that, there is never going to be less data. There's never going to be less of it. The complexity will always be there. The amount of it will always be there. And with that comes the problem of, if you don't manage your data, then you shouldn't have any expectations that you're going to get any value out of it, right? So yeah, I don't see that going anywhere but up. Any young people that I talk to now, my advice is usually like, find a career in data, go. There's so many different things that you can do, whether it is data management, data engineering, data visualization, data literacy, like there's so many things that you can do. Just like get on that bandwagon. It's not going away. It's just going to transform and morph, right, with the artificial intelligence and the machine learning initiatives and all of the moral and ethical dilemmas and applications of that. So there are certainly more forefront areas of the data and analytics landscape that you can be on. I just think like the table stakes of that work are going to be there in spades.
The biggest thing we'll see is, right, when data first started, when it became a thing that organizations, and we're still dealing with this because we're sort of at that place in terms of our life cycle where we haven't figured out where data belongs organizationally, but it's like a department, right? Data is a department, and we've always put data as a department under IT because that's where all the specialists hung out, right? It's where you find your flock, right? All the crazies down, I joke all the time, especially in healthcare, you put IT in the basement and usually data people right next to the morgue because that's where they cool things, including your data center. And so, it's like that is shifting over time. We have people coming out of college that they're used to living and breathing in technology. It's just part and parcel to their day. So we're going to see, I think, a lot less of those sort of centralized functions, and IT as a function will become a lot more federated, living out into your organization rather than centralized. And I think over time, data will follow that pattern as well, because everybody knows about data, right? You have podcasters at 12 years old looking at their trends and looking at their data, and they're, figuring out, well, when I said this happened, so I got to say more of that, or, clickbait stuff, right? But it's data at the end of the day. And so I just think it's become so much more ubiquitous that over time, that model of, centralized data team in an organization will become less and less valuable, and we'll see it become, a little bit more ubiquitous. And then the challenges are different, right? Where it increases our ability to actually have touch points, where we're making sure that we're doing all the right things in a standardized way, even though it's kind of everywhere. And you already see those pain points now in a lot of organizations, but we keep trying to shove it into, well, it belongs here. Okay, so it's not going anywhere. It's just going to get spread around like peanut butter.
Okay. So, and what advice would you give then to people looking to get into data, whether in a specific role or in general?
My advice, it really depends, because there are so many different areas of data that you can work in. And I would say you kind of have to take a baseline of what you know already, right? For people that are more creative, more people focused, better at those relationships, finding, getting themselves prepared for roles like being those translators between, business and IT, being able to gather those requirements and all that good stuff. Being able to develop data visualizations, business analyst kind of roles where you're able to consume that data, coalesce that data, and then like feed it back to someone who doesn't know anything about it, and just like human to human. If that's more someone's strength, then I would tell them to prepare themselves for those type of roles. And the I think the barriers to those kinds of roles are probably lower as well. I mean, there's so much free training out there on Tableau, Power BI, Excel, all of those end user tools that people use to actually interact with the data. There's just tons and tons of training out there, either free or cheap, or even if you wanted to go like full-fledged boot camp kind of thing, like it's not something that you need to put your entire life on hold and mortgage your house to attend. And then there's the more technical roles. Maybe you need to have a really deep understanding of SQL, the data engineering piece of it. Maybe there's more of that like strategic side of things, data quality, data management. Like there's so many different areas. So I first try to help people figure out what is a general direction that feels like is best aligned with that person's strengths. But beyond that, I do think that your first stop should be trying to find a shortcut between where you are, your point A and your point B, that doesn't involve a 4-year degree, right? Look for the boot camps and look for mentors. A lot of these things, like you can actually build a portfolio. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what certifications you have, what your diploma says. It matters what you can do. So you build that digital portfolio, and that becomes your proof of here's what I can actually do. Here's what I can actually build. Here's what I'm capable of. And as an employer, like that means a whole heck of a lot more to me than someone's certificate or the paper that's hanging on their wall. So that's my biggest sort of general advice is like, don't feel like you have to go to a formal degree, through a formal degree to enter into this space. There are many, many other ways, cheaper, shorter ways of doing it. And ideally, there's such a great need for good people in this space. Like we can't wait. We can't wait 4 years for the next, cohort of great data people to come along. We need to find a way to shortcut that.
It's funny. I used to get this question all the time, and then as I've aged out of the, it's like I got to the point where people are like, oh, she's too old to really be able to give me guidance. So, I haven't gotten this question in a really long time, which I find interesting because it's always been one of my areas of interest and passion. So the first thing is, if data sparks joy for you in some capacity, go, because like Serena said, there's a million ways you can get into this space. You don't necessarily have to be like super, super technical. I joke all the time, and maybe it's slightly a joke, maybe it's not. I'm not a technologist, right? Most technology will break when I come into a room. It's just,
that is true.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy, right? But the reality is that I was trained to bang against data, and that's how I spent the first, probably 8-10 years of my career. The tipping point for me was when the executives realized I could talk to them in a way that they understood. And so when I think about guiding people, the main thing, I don't care what your degree is. I don't care if you know some, multilinear regression. What I care about is that you're passionate enough to think about how to present content to your audience. Because it does not matter what role you have. If you're a data architect, data engineer, data visualizer, you're the project manager for data. If you can explain that, if you can explain what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're going to do it succinctly, you will go places. because that's what we're so missing in this space is everybody can get into the gobbledygook, right? Because it's like, ooh, look how smart I am. Very few people can boil that up to, the bullet points and to be able to drive that forward towards something for your organization. And that's really what we need, because that's what you find would be really successful in your organization. I think that's why a lot of people see, they bang against their heads all day trying to get, some data repository up and running, and then somebody buys a piece of software, brings it online, builds a beautiful dashboard, and everybody thinks they're brilliant. Well, because they spoke to the audience and the use cases and what that organization needed. So to me, that's really, where you spend your time, is figuring out how to communicate that.
It's great advice from both of you. So before we wrap it up, as we're kind of running low on time here, but just want to make sure and ask, and if anybody would like to solicit the services of Moxy Analytics, how would people reach out to you? How do they find you?
Thanks for the plug, Shannon.
Absolutely.
So, you could go check out moxyanalytics.com, get a better idea of the services that we offer. You can find us on LinkedIn. We're out there. We put ourselves out there so you can find us.
Indeed. And I know I met both of you, and I, as you presented at our Enterprise Analytics online conference, and Laura, you most recently presented at Enterprise Data Governance Online. So we have recordings of both of those, which were fabulous. So I can attest to your teaching capabilities as well and sharing. So, well, Laura and Serena, thank you both so much for taking the time to do this and talk about your careers. It's really been insightful and valuable. So I know you both are very busy. And thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like to keep up to date on the latest podcasts and the latest in data management education, you may go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Until next time. Thank you for listening to DATAVERSITY Talks, brought to you by DATAVERSITY. Subscribe to our newsletter for podcast updates and information about our free educational articles, blogs, and webinars at dataversity.net/subscribe.